Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. If you could take your seats, please, we'd like to get underway. You're all very welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first Irish Football Stakeholder Forum. We, as I mentioned, are about to get underway. A couple of things that I have to talk you through, but first, the good people here at the Mansion House are very strong on health and safety. And the first thing I've been asked to tell you about is where the exits are. Now, I realise you've only just arrived. It's slightly unusual I'm telling you how to get out of the room, but that is what the people here at the Mansion House have asked me to do. So please have a look around this beautiful round room. The main exit's right behind you where you came in. I'd also like to invite you to put your phones on silent until the event concludes, or at least until we have our break for coffee in a little while. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call on the Minister at the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport, Shane Ross, to address you, please, and to formally open the forum. Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Darragh, and good morning to everybody, and you're extremely welcome here today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Football Stakeholder Forum. I greatly appreciate the time you have taken to join us this morning and to engage in what I hope will be a productive discussion on the future of Irish football and the governance structures required to make that future a success. Minister Brendan Griffin and I have tried to ensure that the group gathered here today is broadly representative, diverse, and inclusive. There are voices from across the football spectrum, male and female, from players, from coaches, from managers, from officials, club representatives, volunteers, supporters, FAI staff, council and board. I am delighted that we are also joined by those dedicated to growing football among minority and immigrant communities, as well as homeless football. I see that we have a number of my colleagues from around the corner in Leinster House, who may surprise them to hear are equally welcome. Well, in some cases, that's the case anyway. And I would like to welcome the senators and deputies who are here. I'm glad that we'll have your inputs at the roundtable discussions. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Aidan Horan and other members of the FAI Governance Review Group, which he is chairing. As most of you will be aware, Mr. Horan was appointed by Sport Ireland to chair this group, together with two independent experts in corporate governance. He has joined us today to hear the panel's views and to observe the inputs from table discussions to follow. There are a number of stakeholders who are unfortunately unable to join us, but who have been in contact with us to express their support for the initiative. They include Brian Kerr, Emma Byrne, Gareth Farrelly, and Paki Bonner. I regret that they are not on here. I think the Champions League actually has got something to do with it. But my officials have been in contact to ensure that the Governance Review Group receives their contributions also. It's no secret that the traumas and the troubles at the FAI have prompted today's initiative. The FAI has been a partner of my department since we first began funding sports programs. We have seen firsthand, and I want to compliment them on this, the positive impact of the association's programs on the ground, particularly for boys and girls football and for people with disabilities. In July last year, Minister Griffin and I launched the National Sports Policy at the St. Lawrence Hotel, at the St. Lawrence O'Toole Recreation Centre, just next to Sheriff Youth Club, which is a thriving football club in one of the city's most disadvantaged communities. We met that day with club coaches and the local development officers who told us about their programs, which are so important to promote physical activity and to divert young men and women from antisocial behavior and from crime. They are doing hugely important work, and we wanted to continue to support them in the future. And they are, in some ways, a microcosm of what football in many ways is, which is a massive community movement. And you here today are representative of that massive community movement. I personally, since I've been Minister for Sport, almost every weekend I see what I call the real football in Ireland, which is the schoolgirls and the schoolboys and the volunteers and the supporters and the parents and this extraordinary community effort, which I see in Ballantyre and in Dundrum and in Kilturnan and throughout my constituency, where there's a kind of swarm of people in an activity which is socially and mentally and physically so good for the community, which I feel somehow we've lost sight of when we see what's been happening and the difficulties which have been happening at the top of Irish football. The FAI undoubtedly has done great work here, but there is, I think, a disconnect, a lack of appreciation, and indeed the voices of those volunteers, the voices of those who give so much, the views of them seem to have been lost in a kind of maze of corporate governance, which we hope to be able to assist in remedying so that Irish football resumes its place in the Irish community and that morale is raised again. We're here today to listen, and I say that sincerely. This is about the grassroots of Irish football today as much as anything else, because in this room we have the beating heart of Irish football, those representatives of groups which do immeasurably good work for the youth of this country and indeed for the health of Irish football itself. We provide the platform. What you're going to do later, when you've listened to the panels, I hope, and they're very strong panels with differing views, is forming groups and feed in your views, which are extremely important. And they will be recorded and they will go directly to the corporate governance review, and they will go directly onto our website to be seen by everybody. This is a democratic exercise, but it's a sincere exercise. And it will be noted if any of your views are not taken into account. But why are we holding this forum today? Apart from the fact that we want the views of those on the ground to be heard and listened to, it is because there's been, and I don't want to be too blunt about it, but it's the truth, a loss of trust in the FAI and a loss of confidence in the FAI amongst the public. That's not a situation which any government wants to see, particularly from a community which is so valuable and which is in some ways doing the work that some would say government ought to be doing as well. Trust has tanked. So we want to assist in restoring confidence. And we do have, out of what appears to have been a tumultuous and very difficult time, we do have here today a window of opportunity which we hope to seize and to start and to assist in reforming Irish football. You know, we're not going to agree about everything, but what I do detect is that there is an absolute appetite for change at nearly all levels, and that we must make irresistible because it's the right cause and it's the right thing to do. Now, I'm not going to refer to all the various reviews and reports and things that are going on behind the scenes. They will come out very shortly, because those are the battles of the past and maybe the current battles. But those battlefields are elsewhere. Today in the Mansion House, we want to look at the future and look at what we can do. I do think that I should say one or two things about current events, just to give you a steer of where the government stands. We don't have the power to appoint, dismiss. We respect fully the independence of the FAI. We have the power of funding a limited amount. And as everybody knows, we have taken action on that particular front. But we did welcome when Brendan Griffin and I received a letter from the President of the FAI a few weeks ago, just before going into a joint committee, which was a low point in morale for Irish football. We did welcome the fact that there was a declaration in that letter that the entire board of the FAI would step down in July, less than 2 months' time, at the EGM, to make way for new people, new faces, and to make a clean break with the past. It was, I think, somewhat inconsistent with that apparent welcome for reform when a recent appointment was announced. And that is something with which we feel extremely uncomfortable. We want to see transparency in appointments. We want to see new people. We want to see people from the grassroots, from the volunteers, from the supporters. We want to see people, we want to see some of the fans. We want to see maybe the staff who've done such fantastic work for the FAI recognized in a much more tangible way. It is our wish to restore funding as soon as possible to the FAI, because we want to see Irish football flourish. But we also would like to see today real ideas coming from the floor. This is a forum of people who have virtually every idea, fresh idea, open to Irish football within their heads. Today we are very, very lucky. This is a unique occasion where we can take a fresh step into the future. I welcome you all today. I say to you, please participate. We will follow up on every single idea put to us, as will the Corporate Governance Review. And we want to welcome a new era of healthy finance, healthy attitudes, and a prosperity in Irish football where the efforts, where the work, and where the extraordinary dedication and lack of self-interest amongst many of you here today is recognized. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Roche, thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to call on the Minister of State at the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport, Brendan Griffin, TD, to deliver his welcome remarks. Brendan.
Thank you, Darragh. Good morning, everybody, and you're all very welcome to today's forum in this room that is synonymous with change and new beginnings in this country. And I really want to echo the words of Minister Ross and concur with everything that he has said. And can I just say thank you to all of you who have come here this morning. It's very, very important that you've made this effort to be here with us today. And I know that for many of you, you had to travel long distances to be here with us. And I really do appreciate, and Minister Ross very much appreciates the effort that you've gone to be with us today. I think it's a very, very important opportunity that we have today to hear the voices of everybody in Irish soccer. And Irish soccer is a very broad church. Nobody owns Irish soccer. Irish soccer is about all of us. And I think it's critically important that all of our voices would be heard and that this listening process would exist. And I think that's why today is important. I was 6 years old when Ray Houghton scored that goal in Stuttgart, and I was hooked from that moment on, deeply passionate about soccer in Ireland. 2 years later, I became a Liverpool fan, and we haven't won a league since, so that hopefully will change at some stage. But, you know, we all are very passionate about soccer in Ireland. We love it. I played in the Kerry District League for 15 seasons. Probably the best friends I have in my life were made on and around that pitch. And the impact I think that sport, but soccer in particular in Ireland, makes in our communities is very, very hard to actually quantify. It's very hard to put it into words because we all know how much it means to all of us in our lives in so many different ways. And that's why I think many of us feel very hurt and many of us are very concerned at present. And extraordinary circumstances, I think, require extraordinary responses. And that's why, from a government point of view, today is happening. We are very, very keen to ensure that Irish soccer is in the best possible space, and we all know that it's not in the best possible space at present, and we want to work to a position where it is. It's very important that everyone's voices and everyone's opinions are respected and heard. Some people may differ in their opinions, but it's important that we would all respect each other's opinions and listen to each other's opinions. And today, I hope that we will help to address the huge frustration that is there at so many levels in Irish soccer and give people a voice, give people a forum, and convince people that actually you are being listened to, your opinions matter. In this room, we literally have thousands of years of experience from the people who are here with us, who contribute to Irish soccer in so many different ways at so many different levels. And this room is an extremely valuable resource in terms of trying to put Irish soccer in the best possible space and to chart the way forward for all of us for the best possible environment for Irish soccer. So I really want to thank you and to say that your opinions are welcome, they are valued, and we want to continue to work with you into the future to get to a better place. So to all of you, I hope today is very successful, and I hope today is everything we hope that we will get from this forum. And again, thank you so much for being with us.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to outline again the format which has been devised by the department for this forum. We will have, as the Minister said, 2 panel discussions. I'll moderate both of those. There'll be 2 breakout sessions taking place at the tables that you are sitting at. As you've heard already, the purpose of today is that everyone's voice and opinion is heard and noted. There will be representatives of the department and Sport Ireland at every table in the room. They will note everything that is said during those sessions. So your opinions, views and ideas will be collated into a document which the department will present to the Governance Review Group. That document will also be made available to the public. The ministers, again, as you've heard, and their officials are very much in listening mode today. They want to hand over that document to the Governance Review Group with the views of what people in this country want for the future of the game and the association. Can I remind you that all of today is very much on the record. The 2 panel discussions which will take place up here on the stage, they're being recorded and they will be broadcast on the department's website later today. As I mentioned, I've been asked by the officials at the department to moderate the 2 panel discussions and to be a neutral presence during those chats. Today, to me, doesn't feel like a day to dig and probe into new ideas, but just to get them out there. So you certainly won't hear me offering any opinions. Mine are the least important in the room anyway, but I'll just keep it to questions with each of the panel members. So the second discussion we will have is titled Corporate Governance in the FAI. That'll take place at around 11:50. The first discussion we're going to have now, it'll be followed by a breakout session for all of you, is titled The Future of Irish Football. That's where we're going to start. So we have 5 panel members who are going to join me up here on the stage. Former Irish international and former chairman of Sunderland, Niall Quinn. Current Irish Women's International, Stephanie Roche. The general manager of Linfield, Pat Fenlon. The treasurer of the South Dublin Football League, Ciarán, Kane, and the general secretary of the PFAI Ireland, Stephen McGuinness. They're going to join me up on stage, please. Morning. Anywhere you wish. Anywhere you wish. You might need one of these, though. Okay. Good morning to you all. Everyone got a seat? Okay. Right. You're all welcome. And Niall, listen, I suppose let's start with you. Your plans and your ideas have received a lot of attention in the media. Can you outline them for us?
Well, first of all, I tried very hard to make sure they didn't go out and that we remained part of a process and didn't seem to be getting an advantage by releasing our plans. And that was difficult because most of the press people here in the room were ringing me, asking me to do that. So we've tried to keep it very tight. There was a leak of part of a document at the weekend. But if I could start by saying, this started with our group, Darragh, by an invitation I got from Stephen to the PFAI dinner at Christmas. And it was on a Thursday night, the dinner was on Saturday, and the person who was meant to have done the do was pulled by the FAI because they had just given him a job in the FAI and said, don't go to the PFAI dinner. And that was, I was amazed to hear that, and I said, look, yeah, of course I'll come. But it was the 3 or 4 hours with Stephen beside himself and the chairman, Gary Rogers, and listening to the tales of woes of the players' lot in Ireland. Then it started to go from being a little bit, adventurous and wanting the League of Ireland to go well before that night, saying, hang on a second, there's a real need for change here. And so I spoke about it. Some people ridiculed it, some people agreed it, but lots of people got in touch with me, and I couldn't invite all of them into our own forum, but I brought in a group of people with diverse backgrounds, but excellent diverse backgrounds, that I thought would be helpful in putting something together for the FAI to look at, because this was pre the crisis developing over the CEO. And we started to put something together. We met the director of the league twice, or I did, and effectively we were told to come back with suggestions, bring them into the CEO and himself. And the following weekend, all hell broke loose. So we realized that there was a crisis on, and so we would let the hair sit. And then as the crisis evolved and developed, we suddenly found, I suppose, a belief that this was a great opportunity for change. And as that got bigger, our thoughts got bigger, and we started to encompass all of the verticals that would needed to be looked at and improved for football to truly prosper again in this country. And it's a 31-page document, and I don't want to hog the whole day here, but what I would say to you, and it encompasses everything that the Minister has mentioned there with ideas, and I hope that the process allows us to release that today, that I'm not looking for an unfair advantage. I hope we can all talk about, from today onwards, what we aim to achieve, because we haven't got a monopoly on the ideas. We don't think that way. We think there's probably other better ideas out there. And we're also coming at it from the outside. We know there's stakeholders in here who've given their lives to football. Their word is probably more important than ours here in this country. We know there are club owners in the League of Ireland, and there's diverse club ownership. There's fan ownership, there's individuals who put money in. They're far more entitled to speak about the League of Ireland than we are. But all we have tried to achieve in the various verticals is the art of the possible. And the art of the possible, I think, there's 2 core elements that make the whole thing work for us. And one of them is a word that's been mentioned a lot, and that's trust. Redeveloping trust, that the Minister mentioned, and everybody seems to mention, it's the buzzword, that the nation would have trust again in the FAI and what it does. But we've looked at it a little bit differently than that. We never reached out to anybody. We only spoke to people who got in touch with us. So it's very important people know that. So we didn't go after the League of Ireland clubs. We didn't go after stakeholders. It was only when people got in touch with us that we went and met them. And I met some staff from the FAI, and they had put their heads above the parapet a few weeks ago to say their conditions weren't great and they wanted improvement. And they got in touch with me, and I met them. And it suddenly dawned on us then, if we're trying to rebuild trust, get the government to trust us, get the people to trust us, get external stakeholders to trust us, the staff in the association don't trust what's above them. So how are those people going to deliver trust to the rest of the country? So the most important part of what we think we could do, if we were given the go-ahead in whatever forum or whatever strategy is decided by the governance review group in time, the first thing we will look at is going in there, changing the culture that staff put up with every day, the culture of fear that we were spoken to about. We want to empower staff in the FAI. They're the ones who are going to bring the message of trust. You know, the people who do the great work, like the minister said. But we started hearing about those conditions, and we put that as a priority. Because if you can't get it right in any organisation, if the people aren't there delivering trust, what hope have the rest of us outside got in delivering plans? So, thank you. And the second most important part of what we aim to achieve in the art of the possible, on all elements, requires, you know, a real input financially. It needs investment. And we have to talk about money. It's something people don't like talking about. I started by saying nobody in our group has a personal commercial interest in what we're doing at all. We hope that because of the governance review, we might be called in to help and assist. We've got great people who have managed, four of our group have managed businesses that turn over way in excess of 100 million every year. They've had crises before, just like ours, but not as public. And we have a very good, I think, team that may be listened to, if nothing else. But what we would like to point out is, you know, and Minister Ross, you know, your article at the weekend and your comments here today, it does lead us to a realization that football is very important in this country. And if our group can help in bringing all the verticals that are required into a better place, probably League of Ireland at the top of the queue, but if we can make a professional industry, if we can bring all the stakeholders with us, if we can have consultation processes, if we can do workshops, if we can really work in the next 18 months to bring the game into a great future where we can have a 10-year vision of prosperity, we will need stakeholders to invest. And nothing would give us more pleasure, Minister, if the government were the cornerstone investor to help us attract private investment, multinational companies who are here in Ireland, who we've already spoken to. We think there's an opportunity, but the badge of the government to help us go out and do that over the next period of time, I think would give us real change. So they're the two core elements that I would mention today. I'm very happy to join in because others will have bits and pieces of other verticals. And I would finish it off by saying we are truly dependent on the governance review group to make sure that it is a great opportunity for change. And the group that I have, which I hope to press a button now and go online and go public with, to a man, will give everything they've got to assist that change that we know this opportunity persists. It's a once-in-my-lifetime opportunity to see an association grasp it, go for it, and have a great 10, 15, 20-year plan built by great people, all people in this room, but just give us the opportunity. And that's the core of what I was here today to tell you about. The rest of it, people might even have better ideas than us, but we'll join in as the debate goes on.
Okay. Pat, I just maybe want to give all of you an opportunity for opening remarks. Really, I don't know if you want to discuss what Niall has just said, or, you know, with all your experience from and in and around, right at the heart of the game in this country, all your life, and a bit abroad too, and now with Linfield. What are your thoughts today when you look to now and then the future for the game here?
I suppose the thoughts are that I see hope for the first time in a long time. When you see people involved that want to develop the game, I think one of Niall's points there, and I'm more or less coming from a League of Ireland background, although I've knowledge of schoolboy football on that end of it, but I think Niall's point that League of Ireland has to be at the top of the agenda, that hasn't been the case. This is the highest level you can play football in this country is the League of Ireland. And I think that's been lost. And I think that's got to be at the top of the agenda. I think coming from a League of Ireland person, the one thing that's been lacking in my time in the game is the transparency between, you know, the league, the FEI, the clubs, and inclusion. And I've always felt that we've been on the outside. We've been the poor part of the association. And I think comments over the year have proved that point. But I think it's a great opportunity to try to develop the game in all aspects. And it's important as well that there are a lot of good people working in the FEI and they've taken a lot of flack over a period of time. So it's important that that's recognised. But it does give me hope at the moment. And I think, you know, going back to the League of Ireland, my opinion is that it needs to be a separate entity. And my experience at the moment, north of the border at Linfield, is that they have changed the structures up there. They do have their own league in the Northern Ireland Football League Association. So that runs really well, what I've seen so far, and there's funding there obviously through the IFA and through European money. So I think it's important that I think we need to know. I've said, lucky enough, said on the Premier Club Alliance while I was general manager down in Waterford, and to sit in some of the meetings and recognise that clubs are not aware what comes into the league in relation to sponsorship, European money, TV rights. That can't happen. We need to know, and that's where the transparency. We need to know what is going on in the game.
Okay, Stephanie, for you, do you want to pick up on what Pat and Niall have said? The women's game is going to be a big part. It's going to have to be a big part, and it is already a big part of the way things are redrawn.
Yeah, well, I think I've obviously played football in Ireland for a long time, and I've definitely seen it improve in recent years. But I think from a player's point of view, I think it's about having a future plan and not just about keep on saying women's football has grown. And I think that's something that as players we're kind of frustrated about, because we know there's plans in place to do certain stuff, but we can't actually see it happening behind the scenes to a certain degree. I think we only have to go back to 2017 when we had to kind of, I suppose, make a stand about what we needed for the future of women's football. And I'm at a stage in my career where I'm kind of looking for the youth maybe coming up, for them to have an opportunity to be able to progress their game. And even just looking at the women's team now, I think if you look, it's probably 90% of the girls are playing out of the country because they have to do that, because the level at the minute in Ireland isn't at a standard for us to be able to come in and compete at international levels. So for me, I think there has to be a plan for women's football in terms of professionalism and elite, not just the grassroots. I think women's football, I suppose, in the world has grown, and there's a lot of people kind of taking interest, a lot of sponsorships want to get involved. But I think here in Ireland, I think we have to really try and kind of differentiate between grassroots and elite level, because the elite players are having to go away, and there's no point in having the great all the way up and then having to go away and not be in the country. And I think that's similar to League of Ireland as well. I think we've got a lot of grassroots young players coming through the system, and they have to go to England or abroad to play at a higher level, when there is a league here in Ireland. There's just not a lot put into it, and that's kind of, I suppose, from my point of view as a player, that's what I'd look at. I think it has to be a better structure all the way through.
Ciarán, what about underage football? Pat has mentioned already his knowledge of it, and indeed everybody here would have a knowledge of underage football, but give me your opening thoughts this morning.
Well, what I would say is that in terms of the underage game, I mean, Niall mentioned the word business. I mean, the reality is we are running a business, and when parents look around at where they're going to, or what sport they're going to choose for their son or daughter, they're looking around at the various sports. Some of them will be committed to a sport and their son or daughter will go into that sport. Lots of them will be floating voters, and they'll be going to the GAA club, the rugby club, the basketball club and the soccer club. And they'll be looking at the coaching standards, they'll be looking at the resources, they'll be looking at the infrastructure. And the reality is, because of the well-publicised difficulties around the financing of the stadium, the resources haven't been going into the grassroots. I mean, from talking to people in the amateur adult game, that's the case, and it's very much the case at grassroots. Now, you know, some clubs, are underage clubs, very well managed, have managed to develop their own resources. But across the board, we're starved of resources, and that's a key issue. And, you know, if you look at where most other sports get their players from at underage, it's very much through the schools. The GAA run a huge program through the schools. Every club, and I can talk primarily about Dublin, which is where I'm living, every major GAA club has a development officer whose remit is to go around schools and source players. The GAA have over 300 people directly involved in games development. We have 50 RDOs and maybe another 12 or 15 guys involved in coach education. So that'll give you a sense of the disparity. You know, the IRFU or Leinster Rugby have just built a centre of excellence in Donnybrook. They're looking to build one in North Leinster. They're looking to build one in South Leinster. So all of the time that we're not investing in the underage game, we're falling behind. And, you know, it's a huge issue. So the FAI do some very good work in the schools across various social inclusion programs, but there is no direct link between the schools and the clubs. So what we've tried to do at league level is to use our director of football to go in, particularly in the South Inner City where, you know, it's a more disadvantaged part of the world, to go into schools, work with the school, and then feed some kids back into a club that we'll have lined up for those kids to go into. I spoke to the former chief executive about this late last year, And, you know, there doesn't appear to be any appreciation within the FAI of the importance of how we go out and source our players. So, you know, their view would seem to be that the schools are run by people from the country, they've no interest in football, they'll find their way to the football club at some point. We just can't take that risk. I mean, we're losing out to thousands, tens of thousands of kids who are choosing other sports ahead of ours because we're not engaged at school level and linking the school to the club to the league, and indeed the club to the National League. I mean, to take Pat's point there, you know, there should be a much greater link between the National League clubs, where there is a National League club, and the local leagues. I mean, they're a source of, you know, getting bums on seats, and there's no League of Ireland club that doesn't need an increase in their attendances. So that's, I mean, they're the kind of key points for me, Darragh.
Stephen, representing the players, the professional players, what are the key points for you this morning?
I suppose first of all, thanks to the Minister for the invitation, because it's quite unusual for players in Ireland to have a voice, to be listened to. In the near 100-year existence of the FAI, there's been no player representation at any committee level, any board level, or at any council level. So the decisions by the FAI over the last whatever amount of time has never taken into consideration players, ever. Steph touched on 2017 when there was a stand made by the players. It should never ever happen that when it comes to that. We have no platform in Irish football. There's no platform for discussion. There's no platform for players to, as stakeholders in the game, to discuss the problems that you face. So whether that's player welfare, whether that's their conditions, whether it's the wages, whatever it would be, there's no platform within Irish football. And what has to change is there has to be a platform for everybody within the game to share ideas, to feel like people care and listen to you. And it hasn't been good enough. And I'm delighted that we're here today. I'm delighted that Pat's a former member of ours and former chairman of the PFA. Steph's a member of ours as well. But it's just not been good enough that that the FAI have not listened to players at any stage. And it's hugely frustrating to me and our membership. There's lots happening in Irish football. Niall spoke at our dinner this year, and there's an excitement in the room when suddenly we're talking about professional football and talking about the League of Ireland as being the centrepiece, and it needs to be the centrepiece of the FAI. Everybody should be aspiring to play at the highest level they possibly can in our own country, and hasn't been shown the respect it deserves, and it needs to change dramatically. From a player's perspective, we want to be part of the rebirth of the FAI, but our voices have to be listened to. Have to be, and everybody in the room here has a part to play. But the collaborative approach that's required by the FAI, it needs to happen. It needs to happen. It can't just be talk shops here of, yeah, we'll listen to it. No, you have to not just listen, act on it. And give us a place in the game. All of us. I'm in a very honoured position to be head of the PFAI, but I'm in the FAI building. I see every day, and the culture has to change. The culture has, I see the staff, I speak to the staff every day, and it has to change. And as I said already, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that the players' voices are going to be heard. And it's important that in the future of our game, that's a collaborative approach from the FAI.
Niall, Stephen mentioned about culture, and again, I suppose, look, when you hear the rest of the panel talk, there's so many strands, and we've only touched on a couple of them there, that encompass Irish football, the FAI, underage, the women's game, the league. Like your idea started when that chat at the PFAI Awards, it focused kind of very much on the league. But it's now expanded. So give me ideas for the rest of all the other parts of the game.
Absolutely. So I spoke about commercial, spoke about the trust that has to be brought back into the game, and that gives us an opportunity then to build and grow the areas. Ciarán spoke about it there, you know, to make the schools great again. So we have a piece on the schools and how that could all change for the better in our submission. You know, I suppose the fragmentation of the game causes issues. You know, we have that many leagues running around. We have AUL League, Churches League. You know, the whole thing is fragmented. So we would like to see in future an ability to join the dots up and have an association with almost a pyramid leading to that lovely elite place where young people aspire to be, as opposed to taking a chance going off with no education at 16 years of age to a second division team in the UK. It is, I believe, absolutely imperative that the player pathway that at this moment in time is broken, because it jinks right to England for every young kid at 15, 16 as they're on their way up. The majority, as you know, come back, and the league facilitates a good lot of those players, and they come good again. It is so important that we all here recognise there must be a viable alternative to that for our kids and for our parents. And that will happen for men and women. And you know, Stephanie is dead right there. If we're really trying to grow this and the professional ideas that we have in an elite player pathway, we've got to be thinking of getting our young children away from the idea that they risk all. Because they're on a 100-to-1 shot to go to these clubs, and they're not going to Liverpool as much anymore. They're not going to Man United, where you could drop down a league and maybe drop to the third league before you have to come back. You're trying to work your way up from the third tier and the second tier a lot in the UK now. So how do you do that? It is our intention, again, I'll go back to that funding is needed for this, but it's our intention to allow people on that football ladder, the guys who've done their junior certs, who now have a decision to be made, they're going into fifth year, have they a chance of going to England, that at that point they would almost join something like the old apprentice scheme, where they would go in to try and be a young professional footballer at the same time as continuing their education. And what we would love to say to parents, to give them an out, to say, oh yes, son, you have to stay at home, and to stop that wonder of taking the 100-to-1 gamble. What we would love to say to the parents is, and if it doesn't work out at that point, we will guarantee your son or your daughter 3 years doing something that really suits them to get a national qualification level that will give them a future in the game. Whether it be in football, whether it be in sport, be it in something that they love, that we give them an alternative that will give a long-term solution. Because I don't need to go into it here, but there are some chronic stories, and Stephen would tell them better than anybody, about the players who were abandoned. Yes, they go over with great fanfare. Nobody hears about the problems when they have to come back, or some of them don't even want to come back. They are lost. There's nothing in England to help them. There's nothing here to help them. And I think there's one area the association really has to come strong on. I suppose when you start looking at the entire stakeholder list, the family, I think it is absolutely imperative that consultation processes and workshops between each group comes together to find the best way forward, to find the correct pattern of league pyramid that I'm talking about, that we can become one. I'm not going to talk about corporate governance, but there obviously is a big section in that in our document. I know there's people talking about that this afternoon, and I'll leave it till then. But we would like to, remind people that the stakeholders are wide and varied. For instance, the referees board. How can we encourage more young people to be referees? How can we get more respect for referees? We shudder when we read, in the newspapers that referees are being attacked at the weekend all around the country. So we can't wipe stuff like that under the table. We can go to various elements of change that are required throughout. I mean, we can go commercially, of course, and bringing the league into a professional place where we too, Pat, believe that the league should be brought to a place where at least it could be explored, that they would be brought an opportunity by the FAI to say, hey, have a look at this. It's the art of the possible. And no matter what we're talking about here, it's a quite simple strategy that we're trying to look at in everything, in every vertical of need that we think that has to change. And that is, what is it now? What could it become? And how much will it cost? And what has to be done to get it there? And we would like to do that for every part of the game, if we got a chance. We are not looking to go in and be the FAI, but we do see a period of uncertainty over the next 18 months. We think on one house, there's one part of the house, there's crisis management required. There's inquiry after inquiry. That will be a lot of energy going into that. But it's very important, now that the opportunity is here, that to run alongside that, the game starts to promote itself again. The FAI starts to promote itself as an organisation that are doing brilliant things with great plans. Now, you can't do that overnight, and talk is cheap. This is lipstick, okay, on ideas, but the hard yards are the answer to this. And how do we get hard yards? As I said, we go in and we invigorize and energize the staff. We pat them on the back. We challenge them, but we bring them into a rewarding workplace. We empower them. We remove the culture of fear. That then sets it all out to the various verticals, those who are working at coaching level, those who are working at commercial level. And we start to build a belief within the organization over a period of time, with the assistance of people like mine, but other people with great ideas here. We're not looking, as I said, for the monopoly on it, that every vertical within the FAI and the inclusion of all stakeholders finds itself in a better place. Consultation processes, workshops, we believe it's communication. We believe that fear of looking upwards, that everybody in there had in these various verticals should disappear. People should be ushered to bring their ideas to the table. They should be listened to in the workplace. We should develop processes, Ciarán, with the leagues, with the grassroots game, that everybody feels they're part of an emerging new FAI that makes soccer great again. And there's lots of aims and targets in there, and some of them were leaked the other day. But I believe the biggest thing that we're advocating here in this window of change is for people to love going into work at the FAI every day, love bringing the game to all the stakeholders, and the stakeholders very happy with what they see. If a group can go in and do that over the next 18 months, while the crisis part and the problems are being sorted out at governance level, then our group would like to play a hand in that and then hand it back to the elected group or whoever comes after that, in as much that the future of the FAI will have, a series set of strategies in each area that will be sound, and will get the input of everybody, not just us.
Just briefly, because we've 5 minutes left here and I want to get the rest of the panel in. You said previously, before all that information was leaked at the weekend and before today, obviously, that I think you were on TV and you said you wouldn't be interested in running the Football Association of Ireland at that point, or being, in a position in management board, whatever. Does this change it now?
No, I think the most important job in the FAI in the next while will be the crisis management.
Okay.
Because there's a lot to get through there in the next, it might be longer than 18 months, I don't know. But I did say if there was a promotion needed from a group, or if, it depends what way the governance review group comes out, and we can't preempt that, and I don't want to preempt that. But if there's a window of opportunity that we can bring good minds, caring people from not just our group into a forum that is allowed to go in there and make real change, I think that would be a great win from the group, and I would love to be involved in something that promotes the game. But the crisis side of it, I leave that to people who know how to deal with that.
Okay. In the submissions that were submitted to the department, and there were many of them, we have a few of the headline points, and I'm just going to throw a few of them out there. Just, Stephanie, there's a point that came from one of the submissions about women's football linked to League of Ireland clubs. Like, you've been talking about a twin track approach with the men's game and the way that you'd like to see it develop. I think that's what your point was, on keeping players at home so they don't have to go abroad to make a living. Like, is that linked to League of Ireland clubs? Is that something that you would favour?
Yeah, definitely. I think from my own playing career, I think I can suppose comparisons would be in England. When I was in England, I was playing for Sunderland ladies, and they were obviously linked with the men's team. And you also have it with a lot of the other teams in Man City, Man United. I've just got a girls team now as well. So I think if the clubs, men and women, can work together, I think it can definitely help improve the overall standard and the overall attendance. If both clubs are kind of getting both their fans to go and watch games. Obviously, you touched on it earlier, everybody wants bums on seats and wants the stadiums filled. So that could be an option to do, and it could definitely work, I think, with women's football.
Pat, there's more of them here. I think, again, Niall touched communications, underage, non-elite football, return to school year. We've read about that in recent times. Youth development, the role of League of Ireland academies, youth development no longer relying on English clubs. Again, ladies and gentlemen, these are just the headlines from submissions that have been made from people in this room. National Football Academy, National Women's Football Academy.
Yeah, I think it's important as well, over the period of time we've seen League of Ireland clubs develop academies and gone from under 19, 17, 15 down to 13. There's a couple of points on this. I mean, that is a big outlay for League of Ireland clubs. The funding and the grants for that is very, very minimal. So that makes it more difficult for clubs who are already struggling. The other side of that is, and it's really important, we've developed all players over the last 50 or 60 years, clubs all over the country, really top schoolboy clubs have developed these players. We've isolated them. We've sort of said, well, we're taking that on as a League of Ireland model, and you go to your own devices. I think that's got to be looked at, because we're losing a hell of a lot of knowledge in them schoolboy clubs all over the country who have developed players for us. And I think the point Niall made about a pyramid system, them young players have got to aspire to something, and aspire to play in the League of Ireland, which is the top of the tree. And all the points that are made in relation to ladies teams, girls teams, they're all very, very valid. But there's never been a discussion around that, even in relation to changing the structures of the league. Again, I go back to the transparency or not being included in the talks of that, and that's where I think this sort of forum can help in that regard. But there's valid points with them all. But you know, underage football is so important that we are now at the stage where the national team, you know, maybe 50-60% of them players have come through the League of Ireland or played through the League of Ireland at some stage. So that has to be, you know, an alarm for people running the game in the country to say, okay, if we've developed them players through the system we have currently at the moment, which is really, really poor in my eyes, if we were to make it better, to fund it, to help it, to grow it, can we develop better players? And I think that is the key. And in fairness, some of our better players over the last few, you know, campaigns at World Cups or European campaigns, qualifiers, have been the players who have come through the League of Ireland. So they have to see that and think there is a real chance here to develop our league, to grow it, to make it, like I said, at the top of the pinnacle in the country. There's no reason why it can't be, but it needs the people at the top of the game to drive that.
And Stephen, you know, listening to what the panel have said, you know, with the development of the League of Ireland players having a path to get into our national team, I'm just wondering, because there's, you know, not everybody can be an elite player, male or female. There's only a very small margin, even in the sort of thing you're describing, Niall, in the process. But, you know, when do players, in your view, when should they become elite?
I think they're elite the minute they start playing at, whether it's 13, 15, 17, 19. One of the things Niall said as well, and it's important, the statistics around this, like, what's a startling statistic to us is 30% of our members and the professional players in the league surveyed last year had only a junior cert or less as their only qualification. And Niall has said the fallout from our league is dramatic, and that's something that has to be addressed. Like, you're nearly 1 in 3 players' only education is a junior cert. We have to start having them dual careers. The football, we know the majority of our players earn the minimum wage, if not less. So we have to have dual careers running where the professional footballing career is this side, but they're thinking about what they're going to do next as well. We've put a new player development manager, and she starts in July 1st. But realistically, she's a huge job in her hands to cover 300 professional footballers and women's players as well. We need assistance from government, we need assistance from the FAI to have people regional that start working with players that we can't be selling them the dream of professional football and not teeing them up for what's coming next. And that's something as a players' body that we're actively pursuing, but it needs help. We can't do it on our own.
I'm just watching time, Ciarán. I'm going to finish with you because there is one other comment that came from the submissions that were put in about the FAI's intercultural plan. That there was a suggestion about a new plan, officers to deal with all areas of discrimination. Now, I know Football Against Racism, Sport Against Racism are doing fantastic jobs, but your league and all the leagues around the country are becoming, we saw it with the 17s, more and more multicultural, and it's a representation of the society we now live in.
Well, I would say one of the areas that I think the FAI does very good work is around intercultural, anti-racism, that type of thing. I mean, because the game is an international game, it tends to be the first choice of sport for a lot of people who don't come from an Irish background, rather than going to the GAA or the rugby. And I think it's an area where the GAA, or sorry, the FAI do very good work. If I could just pick up on one point that Stephen made, I mean, I think, you know, the third level education and links with third level education institutions are really important. I mean, if you look at, you know, professional rugby players in this country and inter-county GAA players, 2/3 to 3/4 of them have third level qualifications. About 20% of League of Ireland footballers have it. And I think you're pushing on an open door with the universities. We're speaking to the Technological University of Dublin, so the old IT Tala, DIT and IT Blanchardstown, about trying to do something to get players into some sort of an elite football setup at under 15, under 17 with an automatic feed through to a third level qualification. And, you know, the importance of it would be that, you know, it's not about football with education coming second. It's about education being first and football being second. And acknowledging the fact that, you know, most people can't make a living, most players can't make a living from the League of Ireland. And even if they can, at 31, 32, 33, 34, they'll be going on to some other career. Mm-hmm. And they have to have a qualification to do that. And one final point I would make, because I mightn't get a chance to do it again, you know, what's happened in the FAI, and I don't know if people are aware of this, also happened with Soccer Australia back in 2003. And it's a carbon copy of the FAI. If you look at Wikipedia, read the details of the case, read the issues that happened, it's a carbon copy. And that issue was resolved by the people at this table here, the politicians and the Australian equivalent of Sport Ireland, who took a very strong view on the competency levels in Soccer Australia and ultimately forced the entire board out, a new board in. They rebranded the organisation with a new name. Hopefully we won't have to do that. But I think, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of the role of the politicians and our colleagues in Sport Ireland, albeit that the FAI is an independent body. But in terms of trying to force change, I think they have a very important role to play.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your contributions. Really appreciate it. What I'd like to invite you to do now is if you'd take your seats at your tables, because what we're going to do now is have the first of our breakout sessions, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to thank you all. We're going to do this. I'm just very tight on time. It's 11:05, so for 20-25 minutes, a little longer if you wish. It's the first of two. If you would please bring down the volume, I'd appreciate it, because I'd like you to welcome for our second panel. And this panel, as I mentioned earlier on, it's entitled Corporate Governance in the FAI. The panel, former General Secretary of the FAI, Brendan Menton, from the You Boys in Green supporters mandate, Tony Considine, economist at the School of Economics at UCD, Colm McCarthy, and finally the President of the Olympic Federation of Ireland, Sarah Keane. So, you're all here. Great, you're ahead of me. Okay, brilliant. I'll sit down. And actually, Colm, I wanted to start with you first of all, because we've heard so much about corporate governance. And I went Googling last night and I found several definitions. There's one which is about the length of this room, but there's a shorter one I found on an American business specialist company called Considine. And they say the three pillars of corporate governance are transparency, accountability, and security. Agree?
Sure,
yeah. Hold her up.
Yeah?
Yeah? Okay. This is going to go well.
Sure. I'd like to just make a couple of broad comments. This is not the only country whose National Football Association is going through a crisis about poor accountability and lack of transparency and corruption and so on. Just a few months ago, there were a number of South American gentlemen were brought along to Sing Sing prison in New York by the prosecutor over wholesale corruption in several national football associations in South America, arising out of a mistake they made. They got the American justice system interested in soccer, which was a foolish move, as Mr. Bletter and various other people found out. That's the first point I want to make about reform in the FAI, which is long overdue. Because FIFA and UEFA have not been adequately reformed, and they haven't, it is going to be difficult for national associations to go off and conduct comprehensive reforms locally. A similar problem did arise with the Olympics. We'll hear more about this, I'm sure, in a moment. And we seem to have fixed the National Olympic Committee here, which is a great thing. If you are on the receiving end of money and advice on corporate governance, for God's sake, from FIFA and UEFA, I got a great laugh out of UEFA sent over a team of people to help with corporate governance a few weeks ago. If you're on the receiving end of money and direction and so on from these outfits, it's difficult for national associations to reform themselves adequately if the international bodies have not been reformed.
But is that not the situation? Like, that's the situation that we are discussing here.
Correct.
And, you know, UEFA, well, they have skin in the game, they have money in the game. There's various points I'd like to dig in with you there, but perhaps at another forum, because, you know, you've made a lot of very strong statements there. We're looking now at today and beyond. And, you know, corporate governance is something that has been discussed at length in relation to the association.
Yeah. And
I'm just, you know, these changes, well, that's kind of what we're about and what the Minister is about in Sport Ireland.
I don't entirely agree in the case of the Minister. The Minister is a member of the European Council of Sports Ministers. It is beyond time that the sports ministers in the various European countries began to take a closer interest in what goes on at UEFA and at FIFA.
It's
open.
Me, Colm, no, there are statutes that FIFA have.
I'm aware of all
you know,
that.
And that
I know,
prevent that.
Yeah, I know all of that.
Interference. Yeah.
Yeah, it's called the Repel Borders statute, which says we do not want politicians and civil servants interfering in our national sports bodies, not for fear that they would infect them, but for fear that they would disinfect them. That's the problem. And it is open to Shane Ross and his colleagues to take a closer interest at European level where it matters. Something that really upset me a few months ago, the president of the Deutsches Fußballbund had to step down because of corruption in German football. Now, maybe I'm naive, but I like to think that they do things properly in Germany. If there are real corporate governance problems in football at that level, I think it's time for somebody else to take an interest, and I think it is the European Council of Sports Ministers, which is not to say that we shouldn't go off and try and do with the FAI what we have done with the Olympic Council and do what we can here, but I think there is a limit to what national associations can do so long as the confederations and FIFA are unreformed, and they appear to be unreformed. Infantino is up for re-election, I think, next week, Brendan, is that right? At a FIFA conference. I'd like to know if the FA are going to vote for him. I want to say one other thing about the comments at the earlier session. I'm very fond of the League of Ireland and even go to matches occasionally in Tala, in case you were wondering. However, I'm always reminded of what happened in the early 1990s when rugby union went professional. And rugby union was an all-amateur sport, except in Wales, I think, where they pretended to be amateur, but it was an amateur sport played by gentlemen and so forth. And the game went professional. And the Irish clubs decided that they would have an All-Ireland rugby league. And they got together 20 clubs, half a dozen in the Wanderers and Bective Rangers and Lansdowne and Instonians and Belfast and Cork Con and so on. And they had a professional All-Ireland rugby league with, I can't remember, 18 or 20 teams for a few years. And they slowly went bust. And the players started going to England, actually, to Wasps and Northampton and so on. Same pattern. And there were 200 people turning up at the matches. You couldn't pay the wages, and so on and so forth. And I bumped into a chap who was involved with Wanderers, which is an old Dublin rugby club down in Ballsbridge. And I said, how's it going? And he said, we're turning this into the League of Ireland. He said, that's what's happening. And they very wisely decided to call a halt and to have 4 rugby clubs in Ireland, in Dublin, Belfast, Limerick and Galway. And particularly Leinster and Munster have been hugely successful. I was out in the Dundrum shopping centre a few weeks ago. There were kids wearing blue Dublin Gaelic football jerseys. There were kids wearing lots of different English soccer team jerseys, including some of the teams that Niall Quinn played for. Optimists wearing Arsenal jerseys, for example. And there was a huge number of kids wearing Leinster rugby jerseys. Now, what's happened since I used to play soccer up the north side of Dublin, a time when Gaelic football was almost confined to the North County, and it was, and rugby was for posh people from the south side. What's happened over that period is that Gaelic football and hurling and rugby have stolen soccer's lunch in the city of Dublin. That's what's happened.
Okay, but like Colm, there's a lot of points you made there. Like I did say at the start of the day that I wanted to be neutral. That's what's expected of me. There's a lot of points there about rugby, the rugby club game, but we're not here to talk about that. Look, I take on board what you say. That's a 32-county game. This is 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland. There's a whole lot. It's a fascinating debate. And I take on board your points, but I would like to involve the rest of our panel, and I don't have the opportunity or the time to kind of debate those points with you, if you don't mind. But what I would like to do, Sarah, with you is, I suppose, just get your feeling and everything you've heard this morning, Colm's contribution, etc., and what you heard from our earlier panel, and the experiences then that you had with the Olympic movement. Like, what are your initial thoughts sitting here today?
I suppose the first thing I'd say is it's great to see so many people here today, because it shows how many people care about the sport and how many people are invested in the sport. And I think that's what we have to go back to. Why are we all here? Why do we get involved in the first place? And what are we going to do now to try and make sure that the sport has the opportunity to thrive into the future? And that does mean people have to be open. People have to be open and listen to things that maybe they didn't understand before, they weren't aware of before, or things that they don't necessarily think is the right thing. But being open to that is vital if you really are a real supporter of Irish football. I'm beginning on my own journey as a member of the Irish football family, because my 2 young sons are in a local club, and it's their favourite sport. So I see all the good that's done on the ground already. And I think sometimes that gets lost when we're in the middle of a crisis. There's never everything's bad about something. It's like people are never all bad, or we're all a bit of bad and hopefully generally good. So I think that's something that I like to say from the start. And recognising the need to change something doesn't mean that everything that went before was all bad. Okay, so I think people need to look at change in that light. Sports corporate governance is very complicated. I look at governance from a point of view, it's how an organisation is controlled and managed. It's how decisions are made within the organisation at all the levels of the organisation, which is why it's complicated. When I first came into Swim Ireland years ago, our organisation was facing 14 cases of child sexual abuse. And this has been dealt with by a volunteer board, most of whom got involved in the sport because their kids were involved in the sport. And they knew, once I was involved, because I was a lawyer, that was my background, able to explain what they were facing, they realised they didn't have the skill set to deal with what was in front of them. In fact, most large companies wouldn't have the skill set necessarily on their boards to deal with that type of stuff. So it is recognising that when a company is at a certain stage or it's facing certain challenges, what skill sets are needed on the board in order to help the organisation thrive. And we spend a lot of our time at the board not talking about the sport, but talking about finances, or talking about legal matters, or talking about companies, because all Irish sport at this stage, most are made up of companies, and companies have to be run like businesses, as well as taking into fact that the business is the business of sport, whatever that sport is. So generally, I'm a great believer in, and I've seen it thrive in Irish swimming, I've seen it thrive in the Irish Olympic Federation, I've seen it thrive across other federations. You need a mixed skill set on your board, and that means you do need turnover. And it's hard. I lost my chairperson this year within the Swimming Federation because I'm still a chief executive. She had to step down. She'd done 6 years. That was her term of office. So I have a new boss for the first time in 6 years as the chief executive reporting into the board. So that's not easy for me on a personal level either. But because we have that continuity, we have a certain amount of continuity within the board, a certain amount of new people coming in on a managed basis. So therefore it works. And what I found in the last couple of years since we've brought independent directors on the board, and there's only 2. So on the Swim Ireland board there's 11. We've only got 2 people who are on the board who are completely outside the board. We have then 2 other people on the board who are from the membership, but we look for a skill set, a particular skill set from them. So they don't come through a committee structure or anything else. It's a skill set, but they're still from the membership. Our chair is from the membership, our secretary is from the membership, and our treasurer is from the membership, but our treasurer must have an accountancy qualification on the basis of the turnover of the organisation at this time. And then we have 4 representatives from across the sport generally who come from the regions, because that's the way we're set up. And so in general, you still have you have 9 out of the 11 are from the membership, but 4 out of the 11 are specific skill sets. So there's a way of ensuring that your sport is absolutely represented at the table, but also bringing in other skill sets. And the other thing I would say about that is, in general, this is the misnomer. People think the sport is discussed at the board level and the board make all the decisions around the running of the sport. In a properly functioning organisation, they don't. They're about the strategy. They set the strategy, which is the direction of the organisation and the things around it. And then the implementation of that is done generally between your staff and your committees. and those structures at a lower level. So there's plenty of serious decision making that takes place or should take place outside the board. But I think there's a recognition that has to take place in order for change to happen within this organisation, which again, I don't know that very well. I'm, as I said, only starting on my journey with the football family. But of the work that people do, of the great things that are happening on the ground, and of the sometimes that if you're going to move out of a role, it doesn't mean you have to move out of the organisation. Perhaps you can go into a different role. And I think it's also about recognising, for people who've been there a long time, you know, recognising the work they've done, and also, you know, the things that they perhaps enjoy as a result of that work, and ensuring that there's a way of managing all of that as well. I think that's an important part of change. So, I mean, for me, the collaboration between Sport Ireland and Swim Ireland, when we were going through our crisis, enabled us to move the organisation forward. And, you know, we're in the best place we've ever been. We're part of the National Sports Policy. We're hopefully going to be involved in the writing of a national swimming strategy. We've just landed our first title sponsor ever in the history of our sport. We've just landed our first world medal. You know, we've so many firsts, and our organisation as a whole, there's obviously some things we're not doing right. That's always the case. There's some mistakes we'll make, but the organisation generally is moving forward. In terms of the Olympic Federation, yes, we've been through crisis. Crisis brings opportunity. Again, the previous regime didn't do everything badly. They did some good stuff, but there's still a need to change, recognising that and moving forward. And the collaboration now between Sport Ireland, the Olympic Federation of Ireland and the government, that's where we have the most opportunity to be successful for our sport, particularly on a global stage, because that's what we're in it for. We're in it to support the participation of our sport and those people performing and representing our nations at the highest levels in the world. And in order to give them the best chance for success, we can't be fighting amongst ourselves. We have to sort ourselves out, do the best job possible at our areas and move the organisation forward.
Okay. Tony, I want to bring you in a moment just to get the supporters' view, because I know you're one of several supporters groups that have made submissions to the gathering. But Brendan Menton, you have written at length with plans, observations of now and plans into the future. Can you outline those for the group, please?
Thanks, Darragh. Yeah. There are two issues, I think, facing football in this country. The first is what needs to be done. And the second is, how are we going to do it? I'm actually more concerned about the second question now. I think from the governance review group, from this forum, I think a lot of answers are going to emerge. We're going to know what should be done. We're going to come very close to it. But the key question is, how are we going to achieve it? But first, let me go back. What do I see needs to be done to change the governance of football in this country? And I think for me, we need to change the structures. We need to change the culture. We need to change, let me use the word expertise available at the decision-making level and at the administration level of football in this country. And when I look at the Football Association of Ireland, and I have been there. I spent 6 years working with Forest Treasurer and 2 as General Secretary of the Association. I've worked with football associations all over Asia, all over Africa as well. But in the FAI, there are 4 strata. And I think we need to fundamentally change each of these 4 strategies. We need to build an organisation that is based from the base and builds to the top, rather than one where the dictates come from the top down to the base. So let me start with general meetings. It's a very restricted access to general meetings. I think there's 175 people attend. A lot of those are on council, a lot of those are on board. So it's a very narrow funnel. With 400,000 people involved in the game, we have this narrow funnel of control. So I want to start by saying, at the general meetings, our clubs, maybe we need something like the GA. 500 clubs are entitled to attend our AGM. And that's where the base of control comes from. That's where everybody reports back to. They're the people, and this is a fundamental change. The AGM must elect the directors, the honorary officers of the association. That doesn't happen at the moment. It's only 59 people in council who have that power. So that's a tightly, politically controlled, privileged, easily influenced operation. So that's a fundamental change that I want to see achieved.
Can I add that that was one of the first changes that happened within Swim Ireland? Originally, it was through the regions, clubs affiliated to the regions, and the region affiliated to the national body. And one of the first changes was to allow all our clubs to directly affiliate to the national body and to be present at the annual general meeting.
Fundamental, because that also reflects the modernisation of football in Ireland. If we look at football is about the underage game, it's about the amateur game, it's about the growing women's game. These groups are hugely underrepresented in the decision-making structures, and that has to change. It's some of our archaic historical bodies who dominate and control and resist change. So we need to change this. The second level then is what we call the FAI Council, where there are 59 members, I think. That used to be the watchdog body of the Football Association of Ireland. It no longer is. It simply goes to a meeting, gets a few reports, every 2 months has a meeting, gets verbal reports on what's happening in the organisation, nods its head, and everybody goes home happy, gets the expenses and all of this kind of stuff. We have to go back to where this becomes an effective watchdog body. And we have to change the structure. And this is where I think representation becomes important. That more underage football, more women's football, coaches aren't even represented there anymore. So, we need maybe an independent chairman who can challenge the president of the board of directors on what's happening here. It needs information. 20 years ago, the minutes of every meeting in the FAI was given to the FAI Council. It used to be the bane of my life because going through the minutes might take an hour and a half. But at least there was a control, there was a check, there were balances happening there. None of that happened. All of this got dismantled. We need to go back to that. When we come to the board of directors, we need expertise, but we need, it's business expertise, and equally important, it's football expertise. So the kind of proposal I've made in my submission to Mr. Horan's government review group is that there would be 15 directors, 10 from football, and maybe 5 with business, and maybe 5 independent from business. If we don't, it's interesting what Sarah said, that they managed to, within their membership, source people with the required expertise. That's great, but if it's not there, then we need to be independent people with the business knowledge. On the football side of things, I think all elements of the games, the coaches, development, the junior football, the schoolboy football, the women's football, the professional players, the League of Ireland. These 10 directors should be elected at the general meeting, at the AGM. And then we supplement it by bringing in maybe 5 independent directors to make sure we have the business expertise to run a £50 million business. That doesn't exist at the moment. The last then is the Secretariat. And for me, one of the biggest problems is that the distinction between the decision-making and the administration has become very badly blurred over the last 15 years, going back to the Genesis report. Prior to that, the Chief Executive or General Secretary, whichever term you want to use, was simply the Chief Administrator. He wasn't a decision-maker. In recent years, it seems to me, and reading the rules of the FAI, the rules were designed to where the Chief Executive become the key decision-maker, nearly independent of the board at times. So that also has to fundamentally change. So that's kind of maybe the first part of what needs to be done.
Sarah, you wanted to come
back? Yeah, I just want to comment on that. I think as a chief executive and also then as a board member in another organisation in terms of, so I'm the chief executive of Swim Ireland, but I'm the president as a voluntary board member on the Olympic Federation. I see the two sides of being on both, and it's important as well that the executive function is allowed to function, because otherwise the organisation won't get quality people in terms of its staffing structure, but also they won't be accountable because there'll be a confusion as to who's entitled to do what. So there is a document called a Schedule of Reserve Functions. It doesn't have to be long, which normally states what's the board's responsibility and what's the executive responsibility. So, for example, a simple example with both the Olympic Federation and Swim Ireland is that the chief executive appointment and remuneration is always a matter for the board, but that at levels below that, it's a matter for either the HR and Remuneration Committee, or in our case, we've decided that the appointment of the performance director is so crucial to the organisation's business that's also something that the board has as part of its business. So I think that is important as well, to have a clear delineation, particularly in a company with the amount of staffing structure that the FAI has.
I think that's a very good point, and I would point out that nowhere in the rules of the Constitution of the FAI have the responsibilities of the Chief Executive be written down. It's a blank canvas as it stands at the moment. And that's crazy.
Tony, how are you? Can you outline for us what you put in your submission to the group?
Well, just, I suppose, from the point of view of supporters, I mean, the first voice that you hear when you go to a game is that of the supporters. Yeah, traditionally, when it comes to administration, when it comes to culture, when it comes to governance, the supporters' voice has been the last voice that you hear. And this is despite the fact that, you know, as a spectator sport, without supporters, football wouldn't exist. The amount of money that comes into the game from supporters, whether it be through tickets, whether it be through buying jerseys, and so on and so forth, is vast. So, you know, supporters should be as valid a stakeholder as anybody. Now, you know, within, you mentioned earlier on that there's a number of supporters groups that put in submissions. I think there's 3 that I'm aware of, and we will be in discussions with both of those groups there. Within the support, there's obviously different supporters have different priorities. Our group was originally put together of international supporters representing independent fans, and we would have a crossover with a lot of League of Ireland involvement as well. There are some supporters that are, you know, they just want to go to the game, they want to get their ticket, they want to go to the match, and that's it. There's some that are, you know, the Irish Supporters Network are specifically sort of more involved with League of Ireland stuff. But, you know, everybody wants to see a better game. And, you know, there's, within that supporter group, there is a lot of supporters that would look at governance and would sort of see, okay, you know, we believe that by bringing in increased transparency, by getting governance sorted out, nobody within the supporter body has anything to lose by that. Now, you know, you've got a situation where at the moment there's a governance review group going on, which, you know, we've obviously sent our submission in, and the submission is part of a broader plan that we've been working on. I think we've just taken sort of 4 headline points on that. I mean, you know, we would have concerns, and we've expressed them just in relation to the timescale of that review group, given the amount of reviews that are going on at the moment into the FAI. I mean, you know, I've always sort of had slight issues with investigations that are going on that have been, the terms of reference have been set by the organisation that's being investigated, but certainly, you know, there's 2 ODCE investigations going on, and there's a KOSI investigation going on that Sport Ireland are involved in that are external. And it's very difficult to look at the sort of levels of reform that's required until the results of those investigations are out. So, you know, from the point of view of going into, you know, an AGM come July, I think it's very difficult for the level of reform that's needed, and even from the point of view of getting supporters' voices on board, for that work to be done between now and then. I mean, we're hearing whispers, and, you know, I don't know how much truth it is, but we're in here whispers of existing board members already lobbying for re-election and so on and so forth. I mean, when we're going into the AGM, our belief would be that, you know, what we need to be looking at is motions or whatever being passed to allow an interim board to be formed, and for proper, you know, full-length external investigations to go on over the course of the next year. And at that stage, when all the information is out in the open, then we can really look at the reform, get the likes of supporters involved, get more voices, as Brendan, I think, has written about, involved, and at that stage sort of go forward, because this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make real change within the game, and we can't afford to waste it.
Yeah, okay. Like, I think they're entitled to seek re-nomination, as far as I understand. I don't think.
I think they're entitled to, but I just don't think it's healthy.
Right, no,
I mean, you've got a situation where, you know, if you've got existing members that are there, and, you know, you've got a structure in place that basically elected the situation, or elected the personnel that have brought us to this point, to simply run headlong back into that again. I mean, you know, existing members of the board, you can either only be one or two things. Like, you know, you're either aware of what was going on, which would make you complicit, or else if you weren't aware of it, then there's a question of why and whether you're fit for purpose, and it can only really be one of those things, so that has to be considered.
Well, we'll find out in due course, as you mentioned, about the investigations. Brendan, I just want to maybe to kind of wrap this up, because I want everybody else to have their opinions heard in our breakout. The next phase now, you've gone through very carefully what you see, so what happens next?
Well, I think, I don't know whether it was Niall, but said, you know, it's crisis management. It's going to take years, 2 years. I think 2 years is a good time, because in 2021, the FAI is 100 years old. So we need to have a new FAI, a regenerated FAI in 2 years' time. And I think, you know, my biggest concern is, what is the strategy to achieve that? How do we actually do this? Okay, the Governance Review Group report is going to be out in late June, go to the AGM on the 22nd of July. But, you know, it's the same old AGM. It needs 2/3 majority of votes to change the rules. 117 votes to change the rules. Is that going to happen? I have my concerns. I think my biggest, the FAI is facing crisis, and to me it doesn't, I know it's brought in Paul Cook on the financial side, and I think that's a great move, but it doesn't seem to me to have the expertise to firefight all the crisis, firefight all the investigations that's going on, and at the same time come up with a strategy to fundamentally change the organisation in the future. So we have a splintered football family at the moment. We're splintered all over the place. Even here today, there's different groups of us that have been invited because we've come from different places. And I would like to change that. I'd like to say, let's put football first. How can we, and I echo Tony's idea of this interim committee, and I've said this from the first day I got involved, that we needed some kind of interim committee because the expertise and resources aren't there within the FA at the moment to resolve the problem and to allow us to move forward. Mm-hmm. And so my appeal that maybe if one thing comes out of this, that we somehow, and let me say, if the current directors are exonerated by all these reports, yes, they're entitled to stay, right? I know I've been critical of them, it's seen as critical of them, but I think the reports and investigations will tell us that. But we need some kind of unified strategy to move this forward, and I think that would be my appeal to the football family.
Sarah, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say a few things, and I'm relatively objective because, as I said, I'm not necessarily right in the middle of the football family by any means, but one has to be cognizant of the current rules and structures. Okay, so the organisation can only operate within its current rules and structures, and therefore, if the decision-making authority is with a certain group at the moment, it's with that certain group, and whether you can bring an interim board or not will depend on that as well.
It would need a voluntary step aside.
Exactly, yeah.
So
that's where the AGM should be concentrated.
I think there's a few things you could look at here. So first of all, and I'm always reluctant to have a go at anyone because I think a lot of things happen in sport, and most people involved are involved with the best intentions. And I would believe that of a lot of the people who are on the board currently and who've been involved in Irish football for a long time without knowing them. But if people have been involved in an organisation for over a certain period of time, everywhere in the world generally, of the more developed countries and nations, it is recognised that they do need to step aside, not necessarily out of the organisation, but out of that role in order to allow the organisation and new people to come in and new blood. So term limits is seen as key everywhere in terms of allowing that, done in a way that is managed, so there's not generally a whole new group in. Okay. So what I'd be suggesting is, without again knowing anything, is for those people who are on that board longer than whether it's 8 or 12 years, whatever's deemed appropriate, I would beseech them probably not to look for re-election. But if there are some board members who are within the term, well then, that is then the board saying, well, we know what good governance means. This is one of the key tenets of good governance, and we'll support that ourselves. And then that's council looking at that as well in terms of trying to bring in a certain amount of new people, maybe looking for people within your membership, if they all currently have to come from within your membership, who you know have skills that the board need at this time, that the organisation needs at this time, that will bring the faith and the trust back in by supporters and others involved in the game. And then at the next stage, then you start looking at the wider organisational change, bit by bit, so that it's embraced by you as a footballing family. It's coming from you. It's not forced upon you. The government won't force it upon you. UEFA won't force it upon you. If you really want change, it has to come from within. Well, all I can say as someone who's been involved in it, any organisation I've been involved in who've embraced it, they have honestly thrived afterwards. But it's not about focusing. These investigations will focus to a certain amount on what things haven't gone right in the past. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be done, but I really beseech people as well to look to the future. Don't get caught up in these bad people on the board and these terrible things that happened. Like, let those investigations happen, but it has to be about how the organisation and the people move forward. Because ultimately, you're responsible for so many young people on the ground who are involved in what is absolutely a fantastic sport with a nation who backs this sport time and time again.
I mean,
Colm,
Sarah's just mentioned trust there, and this is, it's a key point that the entire sort of whatever reform happens, that it has to be credible, and it has to be credible from the point of view of the general public. It has to be credible from the point of view of supporters as well. I mean, nobody wants to see protests at games. People want to go to games just to enjoy themselves, to escape from the humdrum of their life and so on and so forth. And even from the sponsor's point of view, any reform that's seen has to be seen to be credible, because the reputational damage that's happened in recent weeks, and months, has just been so vast that, you have people involved in other sporting organisations that you nearly feel are laughing at you because of what's going on. And that need, like I say, credibility is huge here.
Colm, you want to say?
Yeah, on the overall questions of structures and corporate governance and the proper rotation of directors and how many you should have and what should be the position of grassroots organizations and how should they feed up through the structure. You don't want to overestimate the size of the task. It's been done before. The Gaelic Athletic Association does it better, and the Irish Rugby Football Union does it better. And the RFU is a professional game now. They have to deal with all the powers that derive from that. It's an international game. The GAA is an amateur game. So, the three big organizations in Ireland for field sports are those three. Two of them seem to be, we're not here having a crisis meeting about the GAA or a crisis meeting about the RFU. And so it seems to me that when the governance report is being progressed, and when the Minister and his colleagues come to look at these things later on, they need to think not about what's wrong with the FAI, but also how did the other two get it right? It can't be that hard.
But yes, but you have the group of people here and beyond who they know that there's major tasks to be done, but they want to look that way. I would think, and that's what I'm getting from here. As Sarah said, that point. Look,
it's not, no organisation has it all right either. There's no doubt about that. And governance, and this is the key thing, governance is not a tick-the-box exercise. So you don't just change all this and then you leave it there and that's fine. Governance is a culture. It's an ongoing thing. You have to all the time be looking at what our governance, what's happening. So we made a change within the Ciarán Governance Subcommittee only this week. We didn't have an independent member on our governance committee because we would have felt we had quite a lot of expertise within. But we looked at what's happening now within our sport generally in terms of the advice around that. So our board has now appointed an independent director onto our governance subcommittee. And the others are then from within the membership. So it's something that's always evolving. There's something that's always happening. As sport is always evolving and happening. So the business side of sport evolves as much as the performance side of sport evolves. And I think sometimes people forget that. And the other side is life in this country is absolutely changing. Society is changing. What the 20-year-olds now think and believe and what they value is very different, and their life they're having are potentially very different from what those of us who are older are having. So they mightn't be willing to put in the amount of voluntary hours a lot of people here are, because now you're not really a volunteer anymore. You're like an unpaid professional. You're supposed to know about GDPR in a club. You're supposed to know about safeguarding. You're supposed to know about this, that, and the other. Like, it's quite complicated. So that's why I'm always in awe of the people, all of you here, who put all your time into the sport. But you do have to recognise that sport is business too.
And it is, but it's also the largest participation sport in this country, bigger than the GA, bigger than rugby union.
But I mean, it's not necessarily a like-for-like comparison. I appreciate what Colm was saying there, but I mean, you look at rugby and you can't, apply the same sort of situation to it because of the fact that there's a Celtic League there that
I mentioned about the club game in rugby, like you have that provincial structure, but the club game is not in good shape.
It's not in good shape, exactly.
No.
So, like I say, not everything is rosy in the garden across the neighbour's wall, Everyone holds up rugby as the great example. But, we came here today with an open mind, and there's suggestions out there. We've met other groups just in relation to, as I say, structure the game, structure the professional game in the country that could see a way forward, but that still needs to filter down to grassroots. And as has been said, there's loads of people in this room that do amazing work, and that kind of gets forgotten in the coverage that's happened recently. That needs to be remembered.
Well, to me, that is a very appropriate way to finish our particular chat. I'd like to thank you all, and again invite you to, if you wouldn't mind, retaking your seats on your tables and being involved in our next discussion session. Thank you all. Could I invite Minister Roche back up on stage just with some closing remarks? Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Darragh, and thank you to absolutely everybody here. for attending. It's always a sign of a successful meeting if you hold it in two parts, if you still have 50% of the people there afterwards in the second part. And I noticed that virtually everybody stayed on for the second panel and to contribute themselves to the tables and to the discussion that followed. Today's forum has been a great opportunity for Minister Griffin and for me to hear from you, the principal stakeholders in Irish football. Personally, I found today's discussions extremely thought-provoking. I hope the forum has given the group a clearer understanding of the particular concerns at every level of football in Ireland. That's the Governance Reform Review Group to which I'm referring. I'd like to thank our panellists, Sarah Keane, Stephanie Roche, Tony Considine, Stephen McGuinness, Ciarán Kane, Colm McCarthy, Brendan Menton, and Niall Quinn. We really have heard some very interesting proposals, very different in some ways, but extremely constructive proposals from them about the future of Irish football. I also want to express my appreciation to Darragh Maloney for acting as Master of Ceremonies. I think this has been, it was an experiment, it was an adventure. It's been a pretty unique occasion. I've never seen an occasion like this before, certainly not in my experience as a minister. And I think the idea of bringing together the stakeholders and to see the leadership which has been given by the stakeholders and the enthusiasm is extremely encouraging. And there's been a real note of positivity about what's been said, not just by the panels, but by the informal gatherings, and a real desire and a unity for one thing, I think. And that unity has been a unity for change. I think there's been an absolute determination that we won't continue in Irish football the way we were. There are different opinions about it, but they've been constructive. And I think that's, in itself, very important. Did we seize? I think it was Tony Considine who said in his contribution as a panelist, he said, are we seizing the opportunity? We have this gap. Sometimes when you have a gulf and a tremor and maybe a disaster, it's also an opportunity. And Tony Considine, I think he said, did we seize this opportunity? Are we going to seize it, or are we going to let that mistrust which exists at the moment continue and fester and things continue the way they are? I don't think we are. But it was Sarah Keane who said something quite profound in many ways, something maybe a little bit unpalatable, but challenging, but realistic. And that was that the change which must come and will come has to come from within. That's really a big message here. As the government, we will not interfere in an unacceptable, we will not interfere with the operations of an NGB. We can't, we shouldn't. Their independence is precious to them. And we want it to continue. But we don't want to tolerate a system where corporate governance activities there are unacceptable. And we can bring huge pressures on bodies which are not behaving in acceptable ways, and where corporate governance is not operating at a level which we find tolerable at all. So the reform, which undoubtedly will come as much from you as it will from us. And I think what we have to do, and what's come through today, is we must work together. And that is why the promise, which I think I gave to you initially, but I give to you again now, that everything that you contributed will be up there on the website, that it'll be visible, it'll be heard, that all my officials who have been at every table will collate those messages and feed them into the corporate governance review. And you'll see the result of that. Because in the next few weeks, and this isn't something we can just put off, it's something we don't want to put off. But in the next few weeks, very important things are going to be happening within the FAI. The corporate governance review is due on the 21st of June. And I'm absolutely assured that that will be delivered on time. That will give time, about 5 weeks, to prepare for the EGM. And that should be a time when we see the product of its works and action on the reforms which we have been promised. I don't think it is acceptable, and I think it was Tony again who referred to it, if there is some sort of concerted lobbying for directors to come back. I want to see, and I think most people here want to see, real change here. That's not saying anybody is guilty of anything in particular. What it's saying is this organisation, for the sake of soccer, for the sake of Irish football, has to improve and has to change its ways. At the moment, I intend to spend my weekend and a week off the dole mostly involved and going to see people in the mini World Cups which are going on all around the country. And I know a lot of you here today will be involved in that. And that's what I see. People say, have you got a vision? Have you got a vision for Irish football? That vision I see every weekend. I don't need a vision. I see the volunteers, I see the supporters, I see all those people who've given so selflessly to what Sarah Keane referred to as the Irish football family, which was doing so much. I see that and I say, this is what we want. It's actually there already. The repair work can be done, and I think will be done, and will be done quickly. And I think and I hope that what you've said today and what you've heard today will give leadership and assist those in whose power it is to actually make the right decisions. Thank you very, very much indeed for coming. We will keep you informed. You will see on the website exactly the result of what you have said and done today. And you'll also, I hope, see the results of that in the months to come. Thank you very much indeed.